When we left him, Benjamin Siegel had just taken control of a stalled hotel project in the Nevada desert. A hotel that had never been his idea, designed by a man he had effectively pushed out of his own vision. He had begun making changes, expensive ones. The bill for those changes was about to come due, and it was going to be far larger than anyone, including Siegel himself, had prepared the syndicate to expect. Let's talk about the number, because the number is the entire story. When Billy Wilkerson began construction on the Flamingo, his projected budget sat somewhere between $1 million and just over $2 million. Substantial money for 1945, but a perfectly reasonable figure for a resort hotel of the size and ambition he had in mind. By the time the Flamingo actually opened, the final cost had reached approximately $6 million. Sit with that ratio for a moment. 5 to 6 times the original budget. Not a modest overrun of the kind that affects almost every large construction project ever undertaken. A complete structural collapse of financial discipline. Some of this was genuinely beyond anyone's control. The country was still working through the material shortages and black market construction pricing left over from the Second World War, which had ended barely a year before construction began. Steel, copper, and skilled labor were all more expensive and harder to source than they would have been a decade earlier or a decade later. But the war alone does not explain a 6-fold increase. What explains the rest of it is considerably more specific and considerably more personal. It was Benjamin Siegel. He could not stop changing things. Once he had control of the project, Siegel began ordering modifications with a frequency and an extravagance that made it nearly impossible for any contractor to give him a stable, predictable cost. Marble floors where standard tile would have served identically well. Custom fabricated fixtures shipped at extraordinary expense when standard hardware was readily available. Plumbing systems reportedly torn out and reinstalled multiple times because Siegel had changed his mind about the layout after the work was already finished. This was not the behavior of a man managing a business investment. It was the behavior of a man trying to construct, brick by brick and fixture by fixture, physical proof that he belonged among the kind of wealthy, sophisticated people who built things like this. The same impulse that had sent him chasing a film career a few years earlier in Hollywood. Except now the budget for proving himself was syndicate money, and the stakes were measured in millions rather than a single rejected screen test. Architects and contractors involved in the project later described an atmosphere of constant, anxious unpredictability. Specifications that held for a week, then changed entirely. Materials ordered, delivered, and discarded in favor of something grander. Every change order was a withdrawal from an account that did not belong to him. We should be precise about whose money this actually was. The $6 million funding the Flamingo's construction did not come from Siegel's personal fortune, considerable as that fortune had become. It came from syndicate investors, mob financiers from across the country, men in New York, Chicago, Florida, and elsewhere who had pooled their resources specifically because Meyer Lansky, Siegel's oldest friend and most trusted advocate within the organization, had personally vouched for the project's profitability. This detail matters enormously for what happens later in this series. Lansky was not simply Siegel's childhood friend at this point. He was his financial guarantor, the man who had told other powerful, dangerous people that this investment was sound, that Siegel could be trusted to deliver a return on their money. Every dollar Siegel spent on marble he did not need was a dollar spent against Meyer Lansky's personal credibility within an organization where credibility, once lost, was almost never recoverable. Siegel was not simply gambling with the syndicate's money. He was gambling with his oldest friend's reputation and his oldest friend's life. The Flamingo opened on December 26, 1946. It should have been a triumph. Instead, it became one of the more spectacular cautionary tales in the history of hospitality management. A case study, decades later, in exactly how not to open a luxury resort. The hotel was not finished. This is worth stating plainly, because it is almost difficult to believe. Siegel had pushed so hard to open on a specific date, to make a grand public statement, that he opened the doors to paying guests before the guest rooms themselves were ready to receive them. High-profile visitors, exactly the kind of glamorous, moneyed clientele the entire project existed to attract, arrived for an opulent grand opening and discovered there was, in many cases, nowhere for them to actually spend the night. And then, as if the universe had decided to add its own commentary to the proceedings, a rare winter rainstorm settled over the Nevada desert during the opening period. Las Vegas does not get much rain. It is, by definition, a desert. But on the single most important weekend of Benjamin Siegel's professional life, it rained anyway. The combination was close to catastrophic. Guests who had nowhere to stay, in a town with limited alternative accommodation, simply left. The ones who stayed found a property that was, in numerous documented accounts, still operating with substandard service, staff who had not been adequately trained, systems that had not been adequately tested, an overall atmosphere of barely controlled chaos, rather than the seamless luxury the Flamingo had been built and overbuilt to project. The casino lost money badly in its opening weeks. By early 1947, less than 2 months after that disastrous grand opening, the Flamingo closed entirely. Imagine the scale of what that meant. A property that had consumed $6 million of other people's money, most of it spent specifically to project an image of effortless, glamorous success, closed its doors within weeks of opening because the basic operational fundamentals had never been properly addressed underneath all that marble. The myth of the visionary founder was, at this exact moment in history, running a failed business with the lights turned off. The Flamingo reopened by the spring of 1947, rebranded informally as the Fabulous Flamingo, a piece of marketing optimism layered directly on top of a recent, very public failure. And, to Siegel's genuine credit, business did improve in the months that followed. The property began generating real revenue. Some of the early operational chaos was resolved. There are accounts suggesting that by the late spring of 1947, the Flamingo was finally beginning to look, however belatedly, like the kind of investment its syndicate backers had originally been promised. It was not enough. Not because the business itself couldn't eventually have succeeded. It almost certainly could have. And in the years following Siegel's death, under different management, it absolutely did become one of the most successful properties on what would soon be known as the Las Vegas Strip. It was not enough because the damage to trust had already been done months earlier, and trust, in the world Benjamin Siegel operated in, did not regenerate on the same timeline as casino revenue. While the construction budget was still spiraling, months before the opening, before the rain, before any of the operational chaos that followed, a separate and far more dangerous problem had already begun taking shape among Siegel's own partners. They thought he was stealing from them. Specifically, the suspicion centered on Virginia Hill, who had been documented making repeated trips to Zurich, Switzerland, a country whose banking system was, and to some extent still is, internationally associated with exactly one specific function: making money disappear from anyone trying to trace where it had gone. Hill was depositing funds into a private account there. The mob's own internal estimate of how much money had been quietly diverted, rather than simply mismanaged through Siegel's extravagant design changes, ran to approximately $1 million, a sixth of the entire ballooning construction budget. This was not a rumor whispered by outsiders. It was a calculation made by the very men who had supplied the money in the first place. We need to be careful and precise here, in the way this entire series has tried to be careful and precise about the difference between documented fact and circulated theory. Nobody has ever produced conclusive, independently verified proof that Siegel and Hill were definitely skimming construction funds for personal gain, as opposed to the money simply having been consumed by genuine, if reckless, overspending on the project itself. What is documented beyond any real dispute is this. Siegel's own partners believed it. Lucky Luciano believed it. Frank Costello believed it. And, most significantly of all, given everything that came before this point in the story, Meyer Lansky, the man who had vouched for Siegel, who had called him brave as a child of 12, who had built an entire criminal partnership on personal trust dating back nearly 30 years. Meyer Lansky believed it too. It does not ultimately matter, for what happens next, whether the skimming actually occurred exactly as suspected. What matters is that the people with the power to decide Benjamin Siegel's fate had stopped trusting him. And in the world he had spent his entire life inside, that loss of trust was, on its own, a capital offense. There was a second fear running underneath the first one, and it may have been, in the end, even more dangerous to Siegel than the missing money itself. The syndicate did not only worry that he had taken funds that belonged to other people, they worried about what he might do next if the Flamingo failed completely, if the entire $6 million gamble simply collapsed, leaving nothing behind but debt and embarrassment. A man who already had access to hidden accounts in Switzerland, who had already demonstrated a casual disregard for whose money he was spending, who had a documented history of acting first and thinking through the consequences later, was exactly the kind of man who might, faced with total failure, simply disappear. Take whatever remained, leave the country, let the syndicate absorb the loss and the humiliation, while he started over somewhere they could not easily reach him. This fear, not greed, not simple anger over lost money, but the specific fear of an uncontrollable variable in a business built entirely on control, is what ultimately moved this situation from a business dispute into something with only one possible resolution in the world Siegel had chosen to live in. It is worth pausing here to look at Virginia Hill specifically, because the role she occupies in this story is more complicated than the girlfriend who helped him steal. She had spent her entire adult life as a courier, a woman whose specific value to organized crime was her demonstrated ability to move money quietly, reliably, and without leaving a traceable record behind her. That was not a skill she developed for Siegel. It was the skill that had made her useful to the Chicago outfit for nearly a decade before she ever met him. When suspicion turned toward Zurich, it turned toward exactly the kind of activity Hill had been doing professionally, for other men, long before the Flamingo existed. Whether she was acting on her own initiative, acting at Siegel's direction, or simply doing what she had always done without fully understanding how it would look once the Flamingo's finances came under this much scrutiny, the available record does not allow us to say with certainty. What we can say is that she, too, understood exactly how dangerous this situation had become. And in the days approaching the spring of 1947, she began making arrangements that suggested she had already decided what she intended to do about it. By the time the Flamingo had reopened, was finally generating real revenue, and was finally beginning to resemble the success Siegel had always insisted it would become, it no longer mattered. The decision about what to do with Benjamin Siegel had already begun moving through channels far above his own ability to influence it. Not in Las Vegas, not in Beverly Hills, where he still threw his parties and courted his Hollywood friends, and behaved in every visible respect like a man whose biggest problem was a construction budget that had finally turned a corner. The decision was being discussed somewhere else entirely, a conference, outside the reach of American law enforcement, attended by the most powerful organized crime figures in the country, gathering under the cover of a glamorous holiday party to settle, once and for all, what was going to happen to the man who could not stop spending other people's money on his own reflection. There is something almost unbearably precise about the timing of what happened next, and we want to make sure you notice it clearly before we move into the next part of this story. The Flamingo's official full reopening, the moment Siegel had staked his entire reputation on, happened on December 26, 1946. The conference that would determine whether Benjamin Siegel lived or died was scheduled to conclude on exactly the same day. $6 million. One opening night. One meeting on the other side of the Caribbean, where men who had once trusted him completely were gathering to decide whether his recklessness had finally become a liability the organization could no longer absorb. He was, in that single moment, simultaneously trying to launch the greatest achievement of his life in standing, without fully realizing it, on trial for it. We are going to leave him here, standing in a hotel that finally, belatedly, was beginning to make money. Exactly the outcome he had promised everyone who had ever doubted him. Unaware that the promise had already stopped mattering to the people who needed to believe it. Unaware that an ocean away, in a hotel ballroom in Havana, his own name was being spoken aloud by men deciding whether he deserved to keep breathing. The Flamingo had finally become what he always insisted it would be. It was already too late for that to save him. In part 4, we go to Havana. We are going to show you the conference where 24 of the most powerful organized crime figures in America gathered under the cover of a glamorous holiday party, and the specific moment Meyer Lansky stood up in front of every one of them and tried to save his oldest friend's life. We are also going to show you why, in the end, he could only delay the decision, not reverse it.